Viva el Caribe, 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 viva el Caribe. Aba we the Cancun, no Aba festival, Yondo di Cartagena, no Aba festival. I am a Mexican, I'm a Jamaican, los Dominicanos de
Inspirational speaker, #1 best-selling author, and president of Whimsical World, an empowering brand with the mission to inspire, delight, and educate children of all ages while planting seeds of self-esteem and high achievement. Sherry loves to write, 14 books so far, and she is a recipient of the prestigious Gold Mom's Choice Award, honoring the best in family-friendly entertainment. So please welcome Sherry Fink.
Thank you. Well, I'm super excited to be here today. I was thinking about it this morning and I was like, why does this matter so much, right? And the reason is because maybe you've experienced something that so many authors have experienced, including myself, where we think, oh, I want to do this thing. I want to achieve this goal. I want to write a book. I want to get my message out to the world. But we have this perception that there's only one right way to do that. And the one way that we've been taught often is extremely difficult to break into and can be very frustrating along the way. And while there's no one right way to achieve your goal, I want you to know that there's a lot of other options out there today. So what I'm going to be sharing is how I went from being a small town girl with big dreams to being a best-selling author, and then how to independently publish your books, including publishing, printing, pricing, and making a profit. Then marketing your author brand. And once you have opportunities, how do you evaluate them? How do you make sure that they're really the right ones for your time, energy, and money? And lastly, I'm going to share some real-life examples of ways you can build an author business that you and your readers love. So this was me growing up in a tiny town with really big dreams of being a writer, a teacher, a mother, a princess, and a mermaid. And as you saw from my opening slide, I've achieved a few of those goals so far. And as a kid, I grew up with very humble beginnings. My parents worked really hard and we always had food on the table, but we didn't always have money for things that I thought were important then, like, you know, new clothes and trips and new toys and new books and all of those things. So the way that I dealt with that as a little girl was by creating my own little worlds. I wrote these books for fun and cut my mom's fabric up and made out of cardboard from the cereal box covers. And I was always making things. I was always creating my own little businesses and trying to go door to door and sell my own little greeting cards that I made. And, you know, I just really had this entrepreneurial, creative spirit as a kid. And I kind of lost track of it for many years because when I was really young, my mom told me that I was going to be the first person in our family to go to college. And I didn't even know what college was, but I knew it was important because of the way that my mom spoke about it. It was like it was going to lift me up out of the situation in which I had been born. So she told me I had to do really well in school. So I kind of put my creative stuff aside for a bit. And I focused on school, and I did do very well, and I did get a partial scholarship to college. I liked college so much that when I was in the corporate world, I went back and got a master's degree and then got some more business education when I was climbing the corporate ladder. And finally, you know, I got the job that I thought I always wanted. As a kid, I looked up to people who had these big, important jobs with the big job title and the perks and the travel and the money and, you know, all the things that I thought defined success as a little kid. And once I got up to the top of that ladder, I realized that the ladder was against the wrong wall. Even though, maybe you can relate to this, even though I was good at what I was doing, I didn't have like a passion for it anymore. It wasn't something that was like fulfilling as much to me as it had been when I first started and I was learning everything fresh. So during this time where I was going through a lot of soul searching about who am I and who do I want to be and what kind of difference do I want to make and am I really going to be able to do it in this role, I had a gift of adversity. And the gift was that a woman in my office was bullying me. And it was really bad. I had no idea how to handle it. Like I wasn't equipped to deal with that, not as a child and definitely not as an adult. So I tried everything and nothing worked. But the one thing I knew is that I couldn't run away. My mom raised me most of my childhood. She was a single mom. And she taught me that you work hard, and once you get your seat at the table, you don't just, abandon it. So I knew that wasn't an option, but I wanted to make it better. So one day when I was going to work, I was driving and I was crying. I was so upset. I didn't want to go. And I just had this moment of complete surrender where I said, help me. I will do anything to change this situation. And in that moment, a seed of an idea came. And it was about a rose that grows up in a weed bed and believes that she's the weed. And then the story wrote through me in the car at stoplights on the way to work. I originally wrote it on the back of an envelope with a mini golf pencil, because that's what was in my car at the time that I could get a hold of. And nothing like that had ever happened to me before. As a kid, I was always writing things and thinking really hard about them. But for whatever reason, in that moment of complete surrender, this idea and this story flowed through me so beautifully without my thinking about it at all. So when I got to work, I made a decision. I said, a year from today, I will either be doing something different, working for someone else, or working for myself. And that last one was the big juicy one that I really wanted, but was too afraid to admit to anyone because what if I failed? So I put that story away into a drawer, and a year later, I kept my promise to myself. I went ahead and wrote my resignation and gave them my 2 weeks and didn't know exactly what I would be doing afterward, but I was booked to go to a conference. So I went ahead and went to the conference, and the first person I met there was from Canada, and she started talking to me about writing. And she was telling me about the stuff that she writes, and she asked me, what do you write? And I said, well, marketing and business stuff for the company, just, really boring. And she said, no, you've got more. And then I remembered that little story that I had tucked in a drawer. And I said, well, I do have this story. And she said, tell me. So I told her what I could remember. And she says, I just got goosebumps. You have to do something with that because my grandchildren need that message. And that's when I thought, maybe it's a children's book. So when I came home from that conference, I was on fire. I had never made a book before, not a real book, not since I was a kid. And I was simultaneously terrified and also so excited about the potential to create something and to help kids, and so that their self-esteem would be so firm by the time that they grew up, that something that happened to me, if it happened to them, wouldn't affect them on the same deep level that it had for me. They wouldn't be heartbroken by it, So I was so excited about that idea that I thought, okay, what does it take to write a children's book, right? I didn't know. I didn't know anybody who was an author or an entrepreneur at the time. I had been in academia and in the corporate world. So it was a big journey for me, and I made a lot of mistakes. But within 6 months, I had my very first book called The Little Rose out and available. And then 2 weeks after it became available, it became a #1 bestseller on Amazon. Then it stayed at #1 in its category for over 60 weeks, for more than a year. And it changed everything in my life. After that, I thought, okay, well, I've achieved the goal. I've made my mom proud. I have a #1 best-selling book. I'm helping kids. Now I'll just move on to my next project. But that was not my destiny. No. Then I had another idea and another idea and another idea, and now it's been 10 years and my 14th book is going to be coming out in September. And I write in multiple genres. I have a small beauty line. I have merchandise and lunch boxes and all kinds of cool things that I dreamt of as a little girl, but now I get to do it for real. And one of the other fun things about it is that by doing what I love, by being an author and agreeing to speak at schools, I actually met my husband, author Derek Taylor Kent, who is also a children's author, best known for Scary School and El Perro con Sombrero. And we were both invited to come to an authors festival at a school, and we met backstage in their library. And what do you know? Like, sometimes when you do what you love, you meet the one you love. And our business has continued to grow. It's really amazing to combine both of our imaginations and our characters and our everything that we ever wanted to create into a world that we call Whimsical World that's bigger and better than anything that we could have created on our own. So it's a very, being an author, as you know, is a very unique kind of creative and hardworking, dedicated life. And it's really special to have someone who not only understands that and supports it, but is also doing it as well. So very exciting. So I like to start off with my 3 favorite quotes. I think these sum up my philosophy and my personality very, very well. Maybe you can relate to these as well. So the first is a Chinese proverb that says, "The person who says it cannot be done should not interrupt the person who is doing it." Ray Bradbury said, "Go to the edge of the cliff and jump off. Build your wings on the way down." And I think as an independent author, that's kind of what you have to do every single day. And Dr. Seuss, "Be who you are and say what you feel, because those who mind don't matter, and those who matter don't mind." So first we're going to start with the publishing, printing, pricing, and profit. And we have a fairly limited amount of time today, and I really want to leave time for questions at the end. So I'm going to give you some really a broad overview of these things, but you'll see that I drill down in detail on the things that I think you should know right away. And my goal for this is not that you'll memorize everything or that you'll be able to utilize every single detail. The goal is for you to have at least one juicy nugget from this presentation that you can take into your author career and implement right away or in the short-term future. So be looking for those pieces of treasure that really apply to your situation, and I'll highlight the things that I think are the most important for children's authors to know, and some of the things that can help you hopefully avoid some of the missteps that I have made along the way. So I think it's helpful to give an overview of traditional publishing and independent publishing, just so people understand kind of where they live on the spectrum. And my personal philosophy on this is that there's no one way to publish. There's no one right way, and there's no one wrong way. So traditional publishing might be right for some authors, and even within that author's works, maybe some of their books are good for traditional and others are better for indie. So hopefully after you have this overview, you'll have a better understanding of how they work, and you can make that decision for your future books. So some of the advantages of traditional publishing, and just to be clear, when we say traditional publishing, we mean being published by one of the major Big 5 publishers. That would be like a Random House, a Penguin, HarperCollins, those types of big name publishers, generally based in New York. Advantages would be that you would possibly get an advance and maybe royalties. So when the publisher signs an agreement with you and wants to publish your book, they may offer you, $5,000 advance or something similar, less or more, depending on the genre and how hot the property is that they're trying to acquire from you. And then once you've earned back your advance, so say that you get a $5,000 advance, and for every book that sells, let's just keep it simple and say you make $1. So after you've sold 5,000 books, then you would start making your royalty, which on top of the advance. So that would be your $1 per book. Those paychecks are usually once every 6 months. traditionally. It could vary with some of the smaller publishers. But as you can see, if you're only getting paid once every 6 months and you have to earn out your royalties, it may not be like a retire from your current career situation with your first book. Opportunities might arise from being a published author, like media interviews and the ability to hopefully be in bookstores like Barnes and Noble. Distribution, that's what being in bookstores is. Niche publishing opportunities. So you may not need an agent for the smaller publishers, but for the bigger ones, most of them will only talk to you if you have an agent that has a good relationship with them and that they like to work with. So you also would have to woo an agent that would operate on your behalf as an intermediary between you and the publisher. And you would get to work with the top industry professionals on the publisher's dime. So when they agree to publish your book, then they would hire the illustrator. They would make the final determination on the cover art, the title, the words inside, all of those things. You don't have to worry about it. Sometimes they'll ask for your feedback, but you don't have the final say on it. They've been in business a lot longer, and they typically have a recipe that works, and they want to stick with the right ingredients that they think will make your book the most successful. Some disadvantages, as you can see, it's not always a great chance to earn money beyond your advance. It can be tough. It can take years, depending on the popularity of your book and if the timing is good when it comes out. I mean, if you hit the lottery on this, you can really hit it big, but most of the people, they don't quit their day jobs. Then, most new authors don't get any marketing support or budget from the publisher. So just like me as an indie author, it's kind of up to you. If you're a Stephen King level author, then you're really blessed, and they put a lot of marketing dollars behind getting the word out about your new book. But if you're an unknown author who's unproven, they may not have as much budget, especially in today's times when dollars can be so tight for that industry. Then your marketing efforts they rarely result in making you additional money from book sales, because you have to sell so many in order to make it back through your royalty. Then the publisher owns the intellectual property. So if you sign an agreement with a traditional publisher, they're taking on all the risk and all the expense to produce your book. In exchange for that, you cannot just go and do things with that book, right? Because they own the rights to it. So if you decided, I think I want to make a plush animal out of my characters because you have a children's book with some art, you don't own that artwork. So you would not be able to do that without their permission and the permission of the artist, who probably owns that copyright. Then there's a lack of control in some areas. As I mentioned, they would be choosing the final product. So if you hated the cover and they asked for your feedback and you gave them that feedback and they decided to go along with it anyway, there's nothing you could really do about it. I think that's rare that someone would just, really hate the book cover, but there are instances where they'll put like a character on the cover that doesn't match the description of the characters in the book. There's this weird little things that can happen to be aware of. On the other end of the spectrum is independent publishing. This is also called indie publishing, self-publishing, DIY publishing. I prefer to call it independent because that's really what it is. It's not a self-publishing. Like in my mind, self sounds like you're doing it all by yourself. Like you're going to Kinko's and you're doing your own art and you're doing all the things. The model that I use for independent publishing is I hire people to do all of those professional level things. Like I know nothing about printing. I have to hire someone who's really, really good at that, who prints a quality product at a really good price. And we'll talk more about that in a bit. So it's kind of like the model of the traditional publisher, but instead of going through an intermediary who is then paying for everything, you are the person who is doing it and who is paying for everything. So some of the advantages would be speed to market. So with the traditional publishers, they typically have a production calendar already planned out for the next year or two. So if your book is a book about a certain holiday or spring, for example, a time of year, they might already have their catalog set for the next 2 years for spring books. So your book may have to wait until a third year. If you're an indie publisher, you can figure out the timing that works best for you and for your service providers, and you can release it whenever you want to, whenever the book is done. So it can be a lot faster. You get to make your own decisions, which is a plus and a minus, depending on how you look at it, right? I like to say that, like, every mistake in my book is mine, you know? So you have the creative integrity of your work. You get to art direct for your cover art and your characters and the page design, because you are ultimately hiring the illustrator and the layout designer and whoever else that's going to create that book. So you have the final say because you're the one paying for it. You also own the rights. And that's really cool, because then you have the flexibility to do things like maybe you want to create a board game based on your book. Maybe you're going to have multiple books and you want to feature characters, like sneak them in, you know, in the artwork throughout your series. And because you own the artwork, you can do that. You would have higher margins and be more profitable. And we're going to go over how to calculate what that looks like. And lastly, it's a big happiness factor, at least for me, as someone who's always been entrepreneurial. And, you know, I just really, I'm just really happy being able to make the things I want to make and not having to get a blessing from someone else or permission. For me, I really like that independent entrepreneurial spirit. Some disadvantages would be that it's a possible high upfront investment. So if you're paying for quality illustrations, editing, printing, all the things, ISBN, your barcode, your copywriting, right? That can get expensive depending on who you hire for those first three things. It can be pricey. So you might have to make an initial investment and then make back your return on your investment through selling the books over time. It usually requires more marketing effort to recoup your investment, because maybe this is your first time you're ever publishing a book. So you don't necessarily have the built-in fan base that's going to be hungry for your work already. Now, once you publish multiple books in your genre, it does become easier. You build some momentum, you build a relationship. But as children's authors, we have a unique challenge that other genres don't necessarily have, and that is that our fans grow up. You know, the fans that I found when I was publishing The Little Rose for the first time, they're 10 years older now than they were when that book came out. So I'm constantly needing to meet new fans and have kids fall in love with the characters all over again, because my original fan base has grown into a young adult. Then it can sometimes be harder to get reviews and media coverage, and we're going to talk about some strategies to make that easier. But definitely, if you have a big publisher behind you, you might have an easier time getting on like a big news channel or something like that, newspaper interviews. It's not impossible to get as an indie, but it is a little bit harder. And then it can be harder to get distribution into stores. And it really, I think it depends on what your goal is. Like, my goal is not for my ego to be stroked, to be in a bunch of different bookstores. I mean, I think it's cool and I'm happy to be there, but ultimately, like, my goal is to make a big difference in the world. I want to have a positive impact. I want to reach the most kids. And sometimes traditional publishing is the way to do that. Other times, doing it on a more grassroots level enables you to have the freedom and flexibility to reach more people if you're not hung up on getting the book into actual stores. And also, bookstores are just one option, and we're going to talk about some other potential places that your book could be that would be a wonderful fit and maybe even make you additional money along the way. So why did I go indie? Well, the first thing is the passion. When I first realized that this could be a children's book, I was so excited about that idea. And I knew that if I had taken the time to try to woo an agent and then try to woo a publisher and do all these things, there's going to be a multi-year process in reality, because I had no connections at all. And I just was so passionate about getting this message out. And if I didn't do it right away, I thought I would chicken out. So the fact that I could do it relatively quickly, from knowing nothing to having a book in my hand in 6 months, now granted, with a lot of mistakes made along the way, but still had the book in my hand in 6 months. That was appealing to me because I feel like you learn a lot more getting redirected when you're outside actually doing something, right? You can think about it all you want to, but until you're actually out there in the world, like testing things, you don't really get the feedback that you need in order to refine it and get it where it needs to be. And then as a kid, I always had this entrepreneurial spirit. I mean, even when I played Barbies with my sister, my Barbies were always starting businesses. So that really appealed to me. I like being my own boss. I really like the feeling of getting up in the morning and having everything that I do matter. And it's easier today than it's ever been before. 10 years ago even, it was harder than it is now. There's a lot of services that can make your life a lot easier, and we'll talk about those. The creative integrity, that whole thing, like I have a vision in my mind of what I want this book to look like, and I want that to come to life for the books when they're printed. And then the happiness factor. I feel good about my books. I feel good about what I get to do in the world, and I'm just delighted about it, actually. So one of the things I wanted to make sure to talk about in this presentation that I think is not talked about enough for indie authors is how to price your book. When I first started, I was shocked at how much it costs to produce a book. You would think that you're going to make so much money, right? But that's not always the case. And sometimes you could actually get yourself in a position where you're paying more to print the book and to sell it than you're actually making from selling the book. And we want to make sure that that doesn't happen to you. So you want to consider the following production costs. Now, these are the things that I think are universal. There may be other costs like marketing, or if you have to get a logo designed, or all of those things I'm not factoring in here. I'm talking about just the cost to produce the book. So you have your editing, your illustrations, the formatting, your cover design, the ISBN and barcode, your printing, and your copywriting. Some of these things can be combined, like my illustration team does my illustrations, my formatting, and my cover design, which I love because then I'm only working with one group instead of a couple different providers. So all those things have to be taken into consideration, as well as how much it costs to actually sell the book. So for example, say that your total production expenses is $6,000, okay? And you're going to print 1,000 books to start with. Now, this isn't the only way to do it. There are print-on-demand things that we're going to talk about as an option as well. But say that you are trying to maximize your profit per book, which would mean that you were leaning toward printing overseas. So if you did $6,000 production costs and you printed 1,000 books, your cost per book would be $6. So say that your retail price was $20. So then $20 minus the cost per book of $6 would be $14. That's your profit margin. But depending on where you sell that book, you may not get to keep that entire profit margin. So for example, if you sell on Amazon Advantage, their deal is that they take 55% of the list price. So you have the $20 retail price, they're taking 55%. Then you have to ship the books to them, you have to ship cases to Amazon, and then they fulfill directly to the customer. So that's another cost associated with doing business. Even if you ship the books media mail, there's an expense. So you have to factor that in, and then you have to subtract it, and then whatever that number is, you have to make sure that once you subtract the $6 it costs to produce the book, that you're actually making some money. Oh, and then you have to pay taxes on it. So, you can see where there's an advantage to making sure that you price your book high enough so that all of these things align and you can actually make money doing it. The other good thing about pricing it a little bit higher than you're comfortable with is that you can always put it on sale. When you do events and you're directly interfacing with fans, or you're going into schools, you can offer the schools and the fans a discount because you're not selling through an intermediary like Amazon. So, publishing strategies. You've got to make a profit. And when you sell wholesale, which is when you sell to a bookstore or you sell to an aquarium or anything like that, where your books are on the shelves, you want to make sure that that's usually going to be about 50% is what they're going to make off of the deal. So you want to be sure that you're actually making money after that. Then you want to focus on your return on investment. So that's the money you make after you recoup your costs that you've put into producing the book. And if it won't lead to additional book sales, my philosophy is don't invest in it right now. So an example is when you have a book and you first open the book, there's these papers, and sometimes they're beautiful. They have like a beautiful map or a colorful design or something like that. Those end sheets actually cost money to print. So because most of my stuff is sold online or at events, people aren't really seeing those pages, right? So to add cost to the book, like 20 cents per book, for example, to add those cool end sheets, it doesn't sell more books because it's not a determining factor when people see the thumbnail online. So I don't invest in that at this point in my career. I'm still learning and growing, but I don't think it's valuable enough to justify the expense. So indie printing options. So you could print overseas. My favorite printer is MCRL Overseas Printing, and you can Google them and you'll find their website, and you can get a no obligation estimate for your books. When you print overseas, you have a higher upfront investment because you're paying for everything, before you are selling it. But your cost per book can be much lower, so your profit margin is much higher. Then, if you print, the other option is to print domestically in the contiguous United States, and there are companies like Print Ninja or maybe a local printer. So your cost per book is going to be higher, but you can order smaller quantities, like less than 1,000, which is the typical minimum that an overseas printer will do. Then there's also print on demand, such as Ingram Spark. This has a higher cost per book, but there's no minimum order required. You can literally order one book. This is a great option for people who just want to print like 10 books or 20 books or maybe even 50 books, who aren't trying to build a career necessarily from their children's books, but want to have something maybe for their kindergarten class or something for their family or that kind of thing. You can do small print runs. It also includes your distribution, printing, and fulfillment. So when you upload your book to Ingram Spark, they list your book for sale on barnesandnoble.com and amazon.com, walmart.com, all these different places. And then when someone orders, they print it and then they ship the order out to the customer. So you don't have to go to the post office all the time. It's a lot easier, but you're paying a premium for that benefit. It's a great way to get started with no or low upfront cost, especially for paperback books. The hardcover books, the quality is not as great as the overseas printers, but if you're doing paperback, it can be the ideal solution.